Hello,
Hello.
welcome everyone to AFSC's Facebook Live today. We're so grateful that you all have joined us as we gather together to look at where we are 1 year into the Biden administration. So my name is Kristin Kumpf. I have the honor and privilege of being the director of HMM, our Human Migration and Mobility at AFSC. And I'm being joined today by several of my extraordinary colleagues who work in our migration work across AFSC. So I'll just turn it over to them to introduce themselves. Chia-Chia, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll just quickly introduce myself. My name is Chia-Chia Wang. I am the Organizing and Advocacy Director for AFSC's Immigrant Rights Program in Newark, New Jersey.
Thanks, Chia-Chia. Pedro?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Pedro Rios, and I am Program Director for the US-Mexico Border Program, AFSC's program in the San Diego area in California.
Awesome. Thanks, Pedro. And Imani?
Hi, I'm Imani Cruz. I am the Migration Policy Advocacy Coordinator for AFSC in DC.
Awesome. Great. Thank you so much, Chia-Chia, Pedro, and Imani for joining us today. As you can all see, folks, we have a really extraordinary diversity of staff who range across the country, who work on issues at the border and immigration enforcement and detention issues, and also our policy expert, and Imani. So we're really just grateful to have a conversation today. Again, we are just 2 days out from the 1 year anniversary of President Biden taking office. And we went into that year with so many hopes for a big change from the past 4 years under the Trump administration. And so today we just wanted to take stock of what happened, what really has happened this past year, what kind of policy shifts did we see, and especially what did that mean for our communities? What impact did we actually see around the country, at the border, in the lives of our immigrant friends and neighbors and colleagues, and what does this mean for us as AFSC? What are actions that we can all take together? So I just want to invite you throughout this Facebook Live, please go ahead and first of all, drop who you are in the chat. We'd love to know where you're tuning in from today. And also we'd love to hear your questions and reflections. If you have a comment about what you think has happened in this first year of the Biden administration, we'd love to hear that. If you have an idea about what the Biden administration should be doing on migration this coming year, we'd love to hear that too. So please drop your questions in the chat. We'll be taking those questions towards the end. And so just to kick us off, Imani, you've been tracking what the administration has been doing this past year. So we'd love to just hear very quickly sort of what happened this year. What are some of the highlights and the lowlights of what the Biden administration did on immigration in 2021?
It has been a busy year in 2021 for immigration, and it's gone by so fast. So I will just kind of go through this chronologically, starting with the beginning of the Biden administration. Starting in January, February, there was a slew of executive orders that President Biden signed to kind of undo a lot of the harms that the Trump administration had done in immigration. The highlights of these were that he ended the Muslim and African bans that were racist and xenophobic and kept many people out from the country, even who had existing visas. He also ended public charge rule, which kind of harmed immigrant communities, not allowing them to access public benefits. And then also preserved DACA, kind of stating that the Biden administration was for and supported having DACA, which is the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, which allowed many people who came to the U.S. as children to have temporary protections from deportation and access to work authorization. He also stopped the national emergency at the southern border, which in result moved funding from and stopped construction of the southern border wall and the militarization of that border. And then also created the Reunification Task Force, which had the job of reuniting families that were separated under Trump's zero tolerance policy, where we saw children being torn from their parents at the border and kind of just still in limbo and still not being reunified. So there's still many kids that have not been brought back to their parents. And so that task force is trying to reunify those families. And then we saw an end to the migrant protection protocols as seen under Trump, or also known as MPP, also known as Remain in Mexico, which created awful harms to almost 70,000 immigrants who had limited access to counsel, limited access to the United States to actually attend their court hearings, and were forced to wait in Mexico for their asylum court hearing dates. So after all of those, we were really hopeful that the Biden administration just had a strong start in really supporting immigrant communities. In March, the administration officially named Vice President Harris to take the lead on immigration issues and kind of fighting these root causes of migration. A lot of this was symbolic, and we haven't really seen much, honestly, come from that. And we're still calling on Vice President Harris to take much more concrete actions for immigrant communities. In May, President Biden released a proposed budget, and this was actually very disheartening for many advocates because there were actually increases for numbers of those in detention. There was increased funding for ICE and CBP, and there was an increased funding for border surveillance technology to further militarize the southern border. So this was definitely a step back, and many advocates fought back on these increases. But later that month, we did see some positive news, and the fact that President Biden increase the number, our refugee ceiling cap number. Trump administration last year had originally set the number for 15,000, allowing 15,000 refugees to come to the country. And President Biden increased this to 62,500. Because of the lower number under the Trump administration, the infrastructure for kind of accepting refugees was not there. So the actual number of refugees let in was much lower than the 62,500, or 60,500. But it was a great sign that the president and the administration supported refugees and supported immigrant communities. Moving to the summer, there was start on the Build Back Better Act, which we are still working on. And there was a lot of movement and a lot of advocacy to have a pathway to citizenship put into this bill. There's been quite a few battles there with the parliamentarian, a unelected official who gives advice on the bill, saying that certain avenues and certain pathways were not eligible or were not feasible. But we are still fighting on that. That is still in works, and there's still definitely room to have a pathway to citizenship and Build Back Better. In July, we saw a detrimental case for DACA in the Texas courts that essentially halted the program, not allowing any new applications or any new DACA recipients, but it did still allow for the renewal of those who already had DACA. But this honestly just highlighted the ever-growing need for a pathway to citizenship through Congress, because executive orders and executive actions are very vulnerable to the courts, and that's what we saw here with DACA. And so even though the president supported it, the courts have halted it, and so now that this community is in limbo and is kind of unaware of what's going to happen with their status. In August, we saw another awful court case come out of Texas that started Remain in Mexico again. So we're calling this MPP 2.0. And it stated that the Biden administration needed to restart MPP because it did not take the states into consideration, and this being Texas, a Texas court. And so they restarted it, but it did not say in what capacity. And so many advocates are arguing that the MPP did not need to start now, and it did not need to be expanded as it did. So the Biden administration has expanded Remain in Mexico to now include the entire Western Hemisphere, which now includes the Caribbean and Haitian communities. And it also is being expanded. It's currently only in San Diego and El Paso, but is being expanded to other cities soon, like Laredo. And then in September, we saw just atrocious, inhumane treatment of Haitian migrants at Del Rio border. It was all over the news, and kind of given that this was on the tails of the assassination of their political leader, and then I think 7.2 earthquake. This is just kind of a very dark time for the U.S. to show how we are treating Haitian migrants, and that to this day they're still being deported back under MPP 2.0 and also under Title 42, which has kept a lot of people out of the country and unable to claim asylum, and we will talk about that more later. And then looking forward, this coming month on January 29th, Title 42 does have a review date for Title 42, and we will talk more about this as well. But also March 1st is the State of the Union for President Biden. So we're kind of looking to have a lot more movement happen in this administration before those dates.
Wow, great. Thank you so much, Imani. There's so many different things to dig into from that overview, and it's helpful just to hear that there was lots of actions that happened last year, and many of them really challenging for our immigrant communities. And so we really want to just dig into three different areas that you mentioned. And one, I think that the sort of the biggest area of concern that we've watched this past year from the administration is around what has been happening, or more appropriately not happening, around asylum. And some of the really horrible things that have been happening at the border. You just quickly mentioned a few of those that we can dig in more to, including MPP, or the Migrant Protection Protocols, Remain in Mexico, and Title 42, and also some of the horrific things that we saw around what was happening for Haitian migrants and asylum seekers at Del Rio and other places across the border. So we'd love to just hear a little bit more about that and what that has meant for our border communities, and really just turn it over to you, Pedro, to hear what really has happened this last year around asylum and the border, and what has that meant for you all in the border region.
Yeah, thank you, Kristin, and thank you, Imani, for such a great overview. And I think what I want to highlight is what you mentioned around the symbolism of some of these policy changes, or supposed policy changes. So as you mentioned, Kristin, there are two major policies that the Biden administration has essentially embraced that were from the prior administration, from Trump's administration, that really came from the coffers of the white supremacist department that they were not willing to really prioritize migrants and the well-being of migrants. And so I think, to begin, it's important to say that the Biden administration has not committed the United States to ensuring that they follow federal law and international covenants around ensuring that people who are seeking our asylum are not placed in conditions that are endangering their lives. And so both the Title 42 order, which allows Border Patrol officials to remove people without due process rights, as well as the MPP, or the Return to Mexico program, and essentially the expansion of it by increasing the number of migrants that would be able to, that it would apply to, increasingly place people in harm's way. And that these two policies have been adopted and embraced and expanded in many ways, just point to where the Biden administration is at this point regarding border issues. That there hasn't been really a commitment to ensuring that migrants who are seeking safety, who have been expelled, and we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people that are being expelled. Not to mention the I think it's up to 141 now flights under the Biden administration that have left, many of which are sending Haitian migrants, returning them to Haiti. Many of them are not Haitian born, were not born in Haiti, especially the children. And so these likely are illegal policies, especially the Title 42 order. And so it's worrisome that the result has been many migrants that are facing untold harm in Mexican border towns. There are thousands of documented cases of abuse that migrants have faced, both by state actors and non-state actors. And this is obviously something that's worrisome. And I want to also touch on something that, Imani, that you mentioned around border wall construction. Under the Biden administration, there is still border wall construction that is being done under the cover of building levee wall in some parts of Texas. And so many of the community members there are decrying the fact that the not one more foot that Biden campaigned on is actually a false promise. In fact, there has been border wall construction under the guise of levee wall or levee construction that is impacting people's lives. So all of this increases the possibility that migrants who are coming in without inspection, coming in through the deserts or the mountains, increasingly are facing very harsh terrain. They're succumbing to the elements. And again, this year we saw a record number of border deaths as a result of these crossings, many of whom might have been asylum seekers if it were not for these policies, Title 42 and the MPP, that are in place that make it much more difficult for people to present themselves. And so we are seeing under the Biden administration a complicity to human rights violations that should be called out. And that for me stands as one of the gravest concerns that we have in front of us as we're moving into President Biden's second year.
Wow, thank you for that. And Pedro, thank you for the incredible work you all continue to do at the border and for really tracking. I think that your powerful words around complicity, which is so hard and so real to hear, and the realities of what's happening at the border, even as the administration will make promises and says they want to stop the construction of the border wall, but still the militarization continues. Even as they say they want to welcome asylum seekers. There was early on, and one of the early executive actions that Imani mentioned, I mean, there actually were promises about really trying to create better pathways for asylum. The Biden administration ended the asylum cooperative agreements with several countries in Central America. And yet what we have seen, let me just leave you with this number, that we know that between February 1st of last year, after the Biden administration had started being in office, through December 31st, there were over 1 million expulsions from the border under Title 42. So 1 million times Border Patrol rounded people up and expelled them back to their home countries when they were here seeking asylum. That's an extraordinary number. I can't even wrap my mind around that number. And especially when we think about the ways that we've seen that impact people from multiple countries, but particularly we've seen that with an ongoing policy of anti-Blackness that has been pervasive in our border policies and our migration policies as a whole. And so we just want to again name that what we saw at Del Rio was horrific. But as Pedro named, we've had almost 150 expulsion flights to Haiti. Over 15,000 Haitians have been expelled. And so when we look at that, I just want to ask all of you sort of what you see for these policies of anti-Blackness. And especially, Chia-Chia, I really want to bring you in the conversation about what has that meant around enforcement and detention. And because we have seen not only, I think the other really horrific thing is we actually saw detention numbers grow under the Biden administration. Even despite Biden himself saying that he wanted to see for-profit detention being cut, that he wanted to see detention numbers being cut. So I would love to hear what you all think about that, and Chia-Chia, what that has meant for immigration enforcement, interior enforcement, and detention this year.
Yeah, thank you, Kristin. I want to start by saying that a lot of these systematic injustice happen regardless of what administration that we're in. So under Obama administration, there were 400,000 people detained and a similar number of people deported annually for 8 years. Under Trump, there's more anti-immigrant policies directly from the White House, but detention, deportation continue. So what we're seeing under Biden administration, that policies and practices continue. Even though we saw a short downturn or reduce of the use of detention the first year of COVID pandemic, the number of detention went up earlier this year, and then now it's coming down again. But what we know for sure is that there's no intentional effort made by the administration to curb that number or to eliminate the use of detention, because detention only does harm to communities and family. It does not bring any benefit to anyone. So I just want to say that, those trends and those, policy and anti-immigrant practices exist for many, many years. And so I just want to mention three things that we're seeing under the current administration, impacting, our immigrant communities in New Jersey, because that's where my program is based, and we have we learn a lot from our community members. So one is that we haven't seen adequate resources. Everybody's impacted by COVID, but immigrants, especially undocumented immigrants, are particularly excluded from any kind of economic or other relief efforts. That's one. And that impacts their daily lives, how they can have access to food, how they can pay their rent, and how they can support their children and families. Second is that there's continuous lack of pathway to permanent status, a stable status. We serve large number of people, DACA recipients, as well as temporary protected status holders, and people who just simply have, no valid immigration status and have been waiting for a way to legalize or to apply for permanent residence for many, many years. Their lives continue to be limbo, and they could be facing detention and deportation anytime. So that continue under this administration. So I definitely think that the administration can do and can take more leadership in changing that, calling for the US Congress to pass a law or pay more attention on the lack of immigration policy change. So I do want to emphasize the anti-Blackness, in our country. And I will use New Jersey as an example, concrete example, how we all need to do better, how the administration can exercise more leadership in changing the racism, xenophobia, and the inhuman treatment that that our Black community members have received. So in New Jersey, we passed an anti-detention law, early this year. Before and after that, the detention has gone down in New Jersey by more than 100%. So we see that as a good news. That means that, our communities, including elected officials, want to see a state without detention. And that there's less support for the use of detention in New Jersey. However, the majority of those who are remained incarcerated in immigration detention facilities are Black. Now, it's a good question that we ask ourselves, as well as ICE, Immigration Enforcement Agency. Why? So there's certainly, underlying, racism and biases. There's also the need for a lot of people of color, community of color, to come, and that they lack of pathway to meaningful, status, or simply protection, right? Protection from deportation, protection from the horrific country conditions if they are deported back to home country. Haiti is a great example. We have seen clients who were detained in New Jersey. By the way, New Jersey is a Haitian migrant destination. We have a very, very large Haitian community here in New Jersey. We have seen a lot of Haitian detainees, who once they made complaint, they got transferred to the detention center, mega detention center in the South. In many occasions, our Haitian community members were transferred to deportation staging facilities, facing imminent deportation. It took a lot of effort, a lot of resources, community support, calling to take actions, calling ICE officers, calling ICE headquarters so that our community member could be released. So, those are the real human stories that we have seen, that we feel like we need to share with as many people as possible, including the administration and government officials.
Yeah, wow. Thank you so much, Chia-Chia, for sharing that human face from New Jersey and the range of what you have seen in your deep work that you've been doing on the New Jersey office and around detention for the last so many years, decades. And I think especially it's so important what you named about the shifting in detention, that you've seen some extraordinary positive moves in New Jersey as you've been able to pass really landmark legislation and to see this, the detention centers around you start to shut down, and also the deep concern about what's happening for people currently in detention. And we know that as in New Jersey, as with multiple other states, if there were 200,000 people that were detained at the border last year and then sent to detention facilities around the country, that had an impact in New Jersey. And other places, we know that we've seen so many transfers in our detention system that we continue to see. One of the deeply concerning things that happened is that the Biden administration in their budget for last year put in an increase in resourcing for some of these enforcement mechanisms, and we continue to see vast transfers around the country. We've also seen the Biden administration, one part of the administration said the DOJ actually did some active work to try and shut down some for-profit detention facilities, which is what the Biden administration had promised. At the same time, DHS actually was defending some of those facilities. And in one situation, we actually saw DHS actively reactivate a facility that DOJ had just tried to shut down. And so I just want to ask Pedro and Imani, when you look at the situation, and I know Pedro, when most of those 200,000 people that were detained at the border and then sent on throughout the country. We saw 50,000 people be deported last year, which again, it goes back to skyrocketing levels of deportation numbers back into the Obama era. So I'm curious, Pedro and Imani, what you see around detention and enforcement, and especially this pervasive theme of anti-Blackness when we look at both the money that the administration has been advocating for and the actual ways that this has been lived out on the ground. So Pedro and then Imani.
Yeah, thank you, Kristin, and thank you, Chia-Chia, for your comments as well. Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think we have to always keep in mind that the for-profit industry has a large stake in ensuring that people remain imprisoned and detained, incarcerated. What's interesting is that often you'll see that former government officials sit on the boards of these companies that are profiting off of human suffering, essentially, and it's no error that they continue in their professional lives engaging in the system that profits off of incarceration. So yes, it's a huge problem, and I think it does trickle back to some of the issues that we were discussing around anti-Blackness, and we saw this in terms of the treatment of the Haitian migrants who were pushed back violently, reminiscent of some of the images of yesteryear. But in fact, we realized that yesteryear is this year, and probably will be next year as well, because the white supremacist foundations of this country continue to be endemic to the institutions that continue to incarcerate people. And so unless we are looking to change those structures of power, we're going to continue to see how people, especially those that have been continuously disenfranchised for so long, in this case, folks that come from African countries, folks that come from predominantly Black countries, Black population countries, will be disproportionately treated, because that's how the systems in place have profited off of the treatment of certain people. And at the same time, I think hand in glove with that is that there is no accountability in some of the agencies that are charged with enforcement issues. And so we don't see accountability of Border Patrol officials, especially when they are engaged in this egregious treatment. And that's been part of the history of some of these agencies, including the Border Patrol. Since 1924, when they were formed, many of whom were members of the Texas Rangers, who were known to lynch Mexicans. And there is a growing body of work that's showing that there were over 500 Mexicans that were lynched 10 years prior to the formation of the Border Patrol. And so this, the intersection of the oppression that people feel, I think also should allow us to discuss how the intersection of our resistance is alive and well. And I think that's what I look forward to as we move into 2022, and as we start building more conscientious analysis about what a concept of abolishment really means, and what it should mean for our communities and the communities for whom we are doing this work.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Pedro, and for that really clear look at what's happening with and then I think, as you all three of you have said, that some of the really horrific things that we've seen happen this past year this is not just about what the Biden administration is or isn't doing. This is about the way that our immigration system has been structured for decades, and frankly, the way that our country has been structured, in sort of the deep run policies that continue to promote white supremacy and the layers of oppression that has happened for people of color. I want to throw in a couple questions and then sort of do a last round from all of you, and we can start with you, Imani, because I would love to hear your thinking about sort of from a policy perspective and a budget perspective. What have you seen this last year around detention and enforcement and anti-Blackness? But I think you just took us in a very important direction, Pedro, in terms of what 2022 can look like for us. Like, what does this moment mean for us? Like, now that we are a year in, now that we see where the policies have taken us from this year, the actual impact on the ground in our communities, and the extraordinary work that you all and so many of our colleagues across Human Migration and Mobility, across AFSC, and all of our partner organizations in the larger immigrant rights movement have been doing, and especially at some of the really important intersections with those who are working to end mass incarceration. And I've been so grateful and so proud to work with our Healing Justice Network at AFSC as we've been encountering our Free Them All campaign, as we get ready to work together on a Valentine's Day of action on Valentine's weekend, as we look at sort of the ways that we can continue to be dismantling the carceral state. So what does 2022 mean for us? What can we be doing in this time as we look at some of the awful policies that we have ended 2021 with? So Mani, why don't you start with us and just share a little bit about what you see from the detention enforcement perspective and the budget, and then what are any of your thoughts about where we need to go in 2022?
Yeah, and I'd like to also loop that into a question that was in the chat about kind of the intersections of the criminal legal system and the immigration system and how that affects Black immigrants and Black communities. But there's definitely a strong correlation. Oftentimes, immigrants who go through the criminal legal system then also have to be subjected to the immigration system. And so almost being detained twice as much, twice as long, and serving double time for oftentimes very minimal crimes. And we also already see the over policing of Black communities. And so this is kind of increasing the number of Black immigrants that end up in this pipeline of systems. And there is something that the administration can do about it. One is kind of ending what we call 287G agreements. And these are agreements the Department of Homeland Security have with local police forces to work together, kind of stating that, hey, if you pick someone up, can you funnel them to us? And these agreements can be ended on the Biden administration side. And so kind of ending that coercion between the two can really kind of help kind of break this pipeline that's affecting so many migrants and also just really proportionally Black migrants. Another is kind of defunding these entities like ICE and CBP that are really kind of driving this enforcement machine and driving this detention machine, and kind of by defunding and also just kind of decreasing their budgets in general in this coming year, we would definitely see a decrease in detention, a decrease in the harms that are caused because there's no way to fund it and there's no way to harm these communities financially. The continuing resolution, which basically is extending Trump level funding for these organizations, is set to be the deadline is February 18th. So Congress is currently working on a new budget, and we are definitely advocating and pushing for a decrease in the budgeting across lines for these organizations. Oh, and one more piece is not in the detention piece per se, but in what we talked about in asylum with Title 42. The Biden administration has the power to end Title 42 via executive order. And so that is something else that we are calling on the administration to do, is in this policy that is keeping people from claiming asylum. You said the starkly high number of 1 million people who have not been able to advocate and use their international right to claim asylum in this country is disheartening and is shameful. And so the Biden administration can end that today.
Great. Thank you, Imani, for that list and for the reminder. And I think, again, a really critical reminder, and this is why AFSC continues to be part of a coalition called the Defund Hate Coalition that is looking at how are we really advocating with Congress and really also with the administration to make sure that we are decreasing the amount of money that is actually going to entities like ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and CBP, Customs and Border Protection or Border Patrol, to actually lead towards the ending of those enforcement agencies, because that is not what we need to keep our communities safe. And you also mentioned, and as we turn to Pedro and Chia-Chia, I think another critical piece to add in is that we know that there is such an intersection between what the administration does and what Congress does. And when you, in the beginning, Imani, when you shared about one of the things that the administration did a lot of work on in 2021 is the Build Back Better bill, which it covers a variety of issues, but has also been what we've seen as a pathway to permanent protections all the way to citizenship for immigrants. And we're continuing to be advocating for that. And that's another thing that you all can join us with in the coming weeks, as we hope that bill will continue to move forward, or that any vehicle that would provide those permanent protections would move forward. I want to just invite, as we're coming to a wrap today, I want to invite all of you watching today, if there are any final questions you have for our speakers, please drop them in the chat and we'll try and incorporate that in. But Pedro and Chia-Chia, I want to see if there's any final reflections you have on what we could be doing in 2022 as sort of a national and global community, those of us connected to AFSC or any of our HMM programs, to be advocating for immigrant justice in this time and be pushing our administration in a better direction. So Pedro?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it has already been suggested. Is continuing to push on our congressional representatives, our senators, making sure that they're listening to us, but also on the ground organizing. We have to really ensure that those folks that are most impacted by these policies are able to have the spaces to speak for themselves. So in many ways, AFSC serves as that liaison with communities that oftentimes aren't provided a platform. And so if as AFSC we're able to create that platform for people to share their testimonies, their thoughts, I think that would be really important for us to continue to do this work and to ensure that we're uplifting the dignity of people who otherwise have had their dignity trampled upon, not only by the Trump administration, but also now by the Biden administration.
Thank you so much for that, Pedro, and the reminder for the deep organizing that we do. Chia-Chia, any final thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. I agree with Imani and Pedro. So I'm not going to repeat what they already said. The one thing I do want to say is that there should be a deportation moratorium, and that should have been done, a long time ago, especially those people from Haiti and people from other countries that, there's literally no opportunities to return to. And also for people who have already established families and communities here, that they deserve a chance to be with their families. So, highlight those human stories and continue to learn and talk about, the need for immigration policy change. That's something that we all need to be doing. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Chia-Chia. Thanks to all three of you. We are so grateful that every day, Pedro and Chia-Chia, you are out there in our communities on different ends of the country doing extraordinary work, standing with folks who are at the border and in New Jersey who are being detained, and also organizing together for their rights. The extraordinary resilience of our immigrant communities is something that's so important to us at AFSC. And Imani, thank you for being our new policy advocacy coordinator and for coming on board to work with us on all these different migration issues. As we close today, friends, just want to again highlight a couple of final things that folks shared, and continue to look at the ways that we are really doing advocacy together, because that is the opportunity for all of you to join with us. As Imani said, that we are seeing the end of this month as an important time frame to really be lifting up all of our concerns around asylum. So the anniversary of MPP Remain in Mexico is January 25th. And on January 29th, we expect a decision from the administration on the extension of Title 42 at the border. So that last week of January, please join with us as we continue to advocate around seeing those policies ended and seeing the restoration of asylum at ports of entry along the border, which has continued to not exist now for almost 2 years. So please join us to continue to advocate around asylum. Please join us to continue to advocate around ending our carceral state, to ending the detention and the deportation of migrants, and also what we see in our criminal justice system and the ways that people, especially under COVID, are not being released from jails, prisons, and detention facilities. Please take action with the action alert in the chat. Please join us on our Free Them All campaign and for our Free Them All Day of Action on February 12th and on our Valentine's Day and showing love across walls. And finally, as we call for permanent protections for all migrants, please join us in our advocacy for citizenship through the Build Back Better bill over these coming weeks. It's a critical time to be pushing Congress on taking action. And so we ask really how we can join together around that. It looks like we have just one or two final questions for today. A question around how to reach out to other people and work around the fear of the word defund. I'm very curious to see what you all have to say about that. And how do we bring other people along with us? I'm grateful that someone's thinking about that and hope that all of us can be inviting people in to take action, including people who may have different political perspectives from us and or Republican members of Congress who aren't there yet. So team, what would you say about how to reach out to people and work around the fear of the word defund?
I can take a stab.
Thanks, Chia-Chia.
Yeah. So in New Jersey, we do have experience, reaching out to moderate Republicans. And then I think that, whether on the local level or on the federal level, I do think that I really like the Quaker principle, which is to, there's God in everyone and that there's really no enemy. I think that to reach out and to talk to everyone and without assumption is very important, and without the party politics in the US is pretty divisive. It's very easy that we categorize or put politicians in different partisan camps, but I do think that the human impact, the conversation should be value-based, not partisan, and nonpartisan. So with that mindset, to have the conversation with elected officials, I think that would be good, or the community that supports the party elected officials.
That's a really important point, Chia-Chia. And thank you for that reminder that this is actually, I think, the gift of doing this work as part of AFSC, as a Quaker organization that believes in the dignity of all people, the bit of God in all of us. And so I think that's a really important reminder that we do this work from a very humanizing perspective. We are not demonizing people, and that we are able to have really very real conversations with people in our communities and with elected officials. Thank you for that question. And thank you all for who've been watching today. Thank you for the extraordinary questions and comments. Thank you for staying on for this full live stream. We hope you'll continue to take action with us and join with us. If you have additional questions, feel free to reach out. You can find us anytime on Facebook or send us an email. Again, please join with us in taking action on these action alerts in the coming days around the Build Back Better bill, and also around our Free Them All Day of Action on February 12th, and in our week of action at the end of the month around asylum. Thank you, friends. Thank you, Chia-Chia, Pedro, and Imani. And we'll see you all next time on the next AFSC live stream. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.